many years. So please welcome our future Chancellor of the Exchequer, McDonnell.
So I was late. Austin and I were at a conference around the corner, so it was a bit of a schlep between the two. I don't want to say much apart from this really. The background to all of this is that most of us have either experience of neurodiversity either as individuals, either as within our families, and for a lot of Labour representatives and trade union representatives, it's about in representing constituents or in trade unionism representing fellow workers. And all of us, I think, have floundered quite a bit about just the lack of the levels of recognition. That's the first thing. Second, the lack of support, and also, actually, exactly as you put in the aims, really, the discrimination, the exclusion, and I agree, the injustice, actually, that everyone's experienced over the years. And we've floundered because we've never really come together to say there's an issue here that has to be confronted, it has to be recognised. And we've been working individually, and lots of people here who I recognise have been working individually, either as individuals or as parts of organisations, but there's never been one central point within the Labour Party that we've been able to come together and discuss these issues. And so historically, what's been happening is that we've sort of coalesced around individual campaigns or about individual cases. And actually, it's been pretty bleak. It's been quite cold to be on the outside, trying to find someone who can support you, give a bit of advice. As like yourself, trying to get legislative change, individual campaign. We just thought that there should be at some stage a coming together of all those people who have a concern or in this particular field. And the best way to do that for the Labour Party is to organise first of all, a discussion, and that's what we did, brought people together at the House of Commons. Anyone we thought, just anyone out there where we brought together just to talk through what are the issues we're facing, what are the resources that we need, what are the policies that we need. And we did it on the principle that the disability movement now we've campaigned on for years, which is nothing about us without us. Yeah. So it's not the point that was made about professionals. Of course, it is about the involvement of professionals. Many of them themselves are neurodivergent as well, but it is about the involvement of professionals. But it's got to be led by people who are neurodivergent, recognise that, and want change. And that's what we did. So those discussions at the House of Commons were quite interesting because they brought together a whole range of disparate groups. Some of it was a bit rumbustious, wasn't it, at times? There's nothing like a good argument to actually set the pace of a discussion, really. But the one thing that was decided early on, we need one statement of purpose. And if we could draft up a manifesto, and if we could get a manifesto together, that could then provide us with an agenda to work through in the Labour Party, and it is about recognition. It is about the development of principles, but it's also about the development of the detail of policy for implementation. And then that would give us the ability for when people like Emma Buck comes along, who are just absolutely committed that when they go into government, this will be the agenda for implementation. And the issue there as well is that the point about everything we stand for now is that I keep repeating, this is not about electing a group of MPs who will then go off and do it for us. That will never work. It never has, never will. This is about when we go into government, we all go into government. So we draft our manifesto, we secure commitments from the bulk of the Labour Party through the normal policy making process. And then when we go into government, we all work on the detail of the implementation itself, because any Labour government will need that expert advice and support and campaigning as well. You don't just campaign before an election, you have to campaign right the way through the life of a Labour government because of the opposition that will come up against. So that's how we got to people making a decision, let's do a manifesto and let us set up an organisation. Usually in the Labour Party, we all come together, we set up an organisation, elect a committee, then we split and expel each other. That's the wrong. That's the that's the long-standing tradition. So can we try and avoid that this time? Is that all right? And I think there's the potential for doing that because there's such goodwill around this issue. But it is, it's the point that's come up earlier. Most people within our party, and certainly most within the wider community, will not have heard about neurodiversity. They won't even know the term, and will not understand the whole range of aspects of life that it actually confronts as well. So one of the big roles that we've got to play is the educational role, bringing people up to speed, but also, and this has come up more recently, this last couple of months in particular, challenging not just the myths, but challenging some of the crap we've had to wade through, to be honest, about treatment and all the rest of it over time. And it is a challenge. It is, because there's lots of vested interests here as well that we've got to challenge. So step by step, it was bringing people together, having the discussion, drafting up a policy agenda, turning that into a manifesto, which you've seen today, and then launching a group that will then work on that, both in terms of campaigning for it in advance of a Labour government, commitments within the Labour Party, then also securing its implementation. Where we are at the moment in terms of preparation for government is that an election could come at any time. I'm a natural pessimist. I think the Tories are adept at clinging on to office. They're not. I keep saying that they're not in power. They're not in power at the moment. And Emma will tell you, in Parliament at the moment, we're there most of the time on 1 or 2 line whips because there's no business going through other than Brexit. There's very little other business happening because they can't, on a lot of these issues, they can't agree amongst themselves on what to do. They're in a floundering over the economy overall, so they're in financial crisis as a government too. And as a result of their splits on the Tory backbenchers, it's very difficult for them to govern at all. And their focus on Brexit and the splits that they've got around Brexit as well has taken the whole of their attention. So, but nevertheless, they are, what the Tories are good at is just clinging on to office as long as they possibly can. So I'm a pessimist. I think they will cling on for quite a while, but eventually they'll fall. And the internal divisions that they've got, and it'll be a bit like John Major. I think they won't go out with a bang. I think they'll go out with a whimper where they fall apart over a period of time. However, they might collapse. So we've got to be ready for an election and a Labour government coming into position either sooner or later. And so what we're doing at the moment is each of the shadow teams, each of the shadow secretaries of state and their teams are going through a preparation of a government exercise, looking at the old manifesto, identifying the key policies, their top half a dozen, preparing implementation plans for each of those policies. My team then we're doing another costing exercise. It's in detail starting next month. We're doing it as a preparation. We're calling it a first budget exercise. I wanted to call it a Star Chamber exercise, but Jeremy said that's too aggressive. You can't do that sort of thing anymore. So what we're doing is we're doing a first budget exercise where we're looking at those key policy areas, recosting them, and then looking at the funding sources. And then we're looking to get the draft legislation on the shelf. So what we want to be able to do from the manifesto here is insert into that discussion how these policies are addressing the issues about neurodiversity. Now, if we could do that, it would be absolutely groundbreaking. It would be the first party to look at this in this overall comprehensive way, but we'd be the first government to do it as well. So this is revolutionary, to be honest. I think if we can get the debate going early, and that's the role Emma will play with my support and others. We can get that debate going early now. We could go into government, as I say, with the implementation plans there, the draft legislation in place, and the funding resources available too. And that when you look at it, that could transform people's lives. It really could be. I just come back to it. We shouldn't play the victimhood, but actually there's a hell of a lot of suffering that's gone on over the years, really, and that's why the argument around discrimination, exclusion, and injustice, and in some instances actually persecution as well, that's gone on. That's the problem when you have a poet chairing a meeting. They all look at the words. But I think you can see how we could transform people's lives in this way. And I want to be in a situation in 10 years' time. It's a bit like other campaigns for equality and against inequality, where people think, well, yeah, why didn't we think of that anyway? And it's that Tony Benn thing. You start off and they try and they oppose you by saying that this is ludicrous and all this sort of thing, and then you begin to win the argument, and then they think, well, why didn't we think of it in the first place? And then you get to that stage where they all thought it was their idea anyway. And I think that's what we want this manifesto to be like. That we convince people, we break through, and then it becomes the norm. That why didn't we address this in the last 20, 30 years, that sort of thing. So this is really important anyway, and I'm glad we've got to this stage. The next stage, I think, is critical. That's why setting up the organisation is important as well. I'll shut up at that point.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.